15 years is a long time to bury a ghost. You convince yourself the hollow ache in your chest is just the mundane reality of growing up. Then, the doorbell rings. He's standing there, older, exhausted, carrying a single duffel bag and a secret destined to burn your quiet life down. The bell above the workshop door didn't chime. It clattered. It was a harsh, metallic sound that I had been meaning to fix for the better part of 3 years. I didn't look up immediately. I was up to my elbows in chemical stripper, trying to coax 70 years of cheap blackened varnish off a white oak credenza. The fumes were thick enough to blur the edges of the room. "We're closed," I said, my voice muffled by the heavy respirator mask strapped to my face. "Signs on the door." The person didn't leave. The floorboards, ancient and warped, groaned under the weight of someone shifting their stance. I set my steel wool down, peeled the rubber gloves off with a wet snap, and pulled the mask down to hang around my neck. I turned around, a polite, retail-ready dismissal already loaded on my tongue. It died in my throat. He was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light, filtering in from the Seattle street. He was drenched, rainwater pooling off the hem of a cheap canvas jacket, dripping onto my sawdust-covered floor. 15 years. That's 4,500, and some odd days. Enough time for cells to regenerate, for a boy to become a man, for anger to calcify into a dull, manageable indifference. Or so I had thought. "Hey, Artie." Nobody called me Artie. Not anymore. Not since I was 17, sitting on the hood of a rusted Chevrolet, drinking stolen beers and dreaming of anywhere but here. "Lamar," I said. The name felt foreign in my mouth, heavy, sharp around the edges. He offered a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The Lamar in my memory, the golden boy with an electric, restless energy who had promised me the world before vanishing into the night without a goodbye, was gone. This man was hollowed out. His skin had a gray, waxy pallor. The sharp jawline I used to trace in the dark of his basement bedroom was obscured by a scruffy, uneven beard. He looked thinner, fragile. "You're tracking water into my shop," I said. It was the only thing my brain could process. Not "where have you been," or "why did you leave me," or "how dare you show up here." Just the water. Lamar looked down at his boots. They were worn down at the heels, the leather cracked and begging for oil. "Sorry, I didn't know where else to go. I looked you up, saw the shop. You're in Seattle," I stated, leaning back against the workbench. The edge of the oak dug into my lower back, a grounding physical pain to tether me to reality. "You went to New York. You were going to be a hotshot broker, buy a penthouse, never look back." "Things change," he said. His voice was gravelly, lacking the smooth, arrogant cadence it used to carry. He shifted his weight again, and I noticed, just barely, a slight tremor in his left hand. He shoved it deep into his jacket pocket. "Look, Artie, I know I have no right. I know that, but I just need a place to crash. 2 nights, maybe 3. I'm tapped out. I haven't slept in a bed in—" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "A while. Please. I am not a soft man. My 20s had beaten the romance out of me, replacing it with a healthy cynicism and a preference for things that could be fixed with wood glue and clamps. I had a life, a quiet, perfectly acceptable life. I had a 2-bedroom townhouse, a sensible mortgage, and Deegan. Deegan was an actuary. He liked spreadsheets, matching towels, and predictability. He loved me in a quiet, steady way that didn't leave me bruised. Bringing Lamar into our home was the equivalent of dropping a lit match into a dry paper mill. 2 nights, I heard myself say. My voice sounded detached, like it belonged to someone else, someone infinitely stupider. Relief washed over his face, so profound it was almost grotesque. "Thank you, God, Artie, thank you." "It's Abbott now," I said, grabbing my keys off the pegboard. "And my partner, Deegan, is going to have questions. You're going to answer them politely, you're going to sleep in the guest room, and then you're going to leave." Lamar nodded, picking up his sagging duffel bag. It looked entirely too light to contain a man's whole life. "Whatever you say, just thank you." I locked up the shop, the clatter of the deadbolt echoing loudly in the quiet street. I didn't look at him as we walked to my truck. I couldn't. If I looked too closely, I knew the indifference I had spent 15 years building would shatter like cheap glass. The drive to the townhouse was agonizingly silent. The windshield wipers beat a rhythmic, metronomic thump-thump that did nothing to drown out the heavy breathing coming from the passenger seat. Lamar sat rigid, staring out the window at the passing suburban blur. When we got inside, the smell of garlic and roasting rosemary hit me. Deegan was home early. Deegan emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a pristine white dish towel. He was wearing his usual post-work attire, pressed slacks and a soft cashmere sweater. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the dripping, shivering man standing on his hardwood floors. "Abbott?" Deegan's tone was measured, carefully hiding the alarm. "Did you bring a stray home from the shop?" "Deegan, this is Lamar," I said, stripping off my wet coat. "An old friend from high school. He's in town for a couple of days and had some trouble with his hotel. I told him he could use the guest room." I lied with the ease of a teenager, a muscle memory waking up after a decade and a half of dormancy. Deegan's eyes flicked to me, calculating. He knew my history. He knew the broad strokes of the boy who broke my heart, though I had never spoken the name Lamar out loud. He was smart enough to put the pieces together. "Lamar," Deegan said, stepping forward and extending a hand. "Abbott has mentioned you, though I was under the impression you lived on the East Coast." Lamar hesitated before taking the hand. His grip was weak. "I did, yeah. Good to meet you, Deegan. I'm sorry for the intrusion. It's just for a night or two." "Of course," Deegan said smoothly, though his smile was purely structural. "Abbott, why don't you show Lamar to the spare room? Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. I hope you like roast chicken, Lamar." "I eat anything," Lamar said quietly. Dinner was an exercise in slow torture. The dining room table, a beautiful mahogany piece I had restored myself, felt as wide as an ocean. Deegan sat at the head, pouring Pinot Noir with practiced grace. I sat across from Lamar. In the warm overhead lighting, Lamar looked even worse than he had in the shop. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. He ate ravenously, yet mechanically, like he was fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. "So, Lamar," Deegan began, cutting his chicken into perfectly even squares. "What brings you back to the West Coast? Business?" "Something like that," Lamar muttered between bites. He didn't look up from his plate. "Finance, right? Abbott mentioned you went to Wharton." "I did," Lamar said. He took a long, desperate gulp of his wine. "Left the industry a few years ago. The hours. They burn you out." "I can imagine," Deegan replied, his tone polite but probing. "What are you doing now?" Lamar's jaw tightened. Consulting, freelance, jumping around a bit. It was bullshit. I knew it. Deegan knew it. The frayed cuffs of Lamar's shirt, the hollowed-out cheeks, the distinct lack of a cell phone on the table. None of it screamed, freelance consultant. But Deegan, bless his pragmatic heart, didn't press the issue. He merely nodded and steered the conversation toward local weather patterns and my recent projects at the shop. I barely spoke. I just watched Lamar. I watched the way his right hand gripped his fork entirely too tight, the knuckles white. I watched the way he occasionally lost the thread of Deegan's mundane stories, his eyes glazing over, staring at a spot on the wall behind my head, before snapping back with a subtle, violent jerk. He was vibrating on a frequency of pure anxiety. After dinner, Deegan excused himself to take a work call in the office, leaving me alone with Lamar to clear the dishes. The kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the dishwasher. I stood at the sink, rinsing plates, while Lamar awkwardly leaned against the counter. "He's a good guy," Lamar said finally. His voice was soft, devoid of the defensive edge he had at the table. "He is," I said, scrubbing a plate a little harder than necessary. "He's stable. He doesn't disappear." The barb landed. I saw him flinch out of the corner of my eye. "I deserved that," Lamar whispered. "You deserve a lot worse, Lamar. You want to tell me what's actually going on? Because the Wall Street burnout story is wearing pretty thin. Are you in trouble? Do you owe money?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Nothing like that. Things fell apart, Artie. Sometimes you build a life and you realize the foundation is made of sand. One wave, and it's gone. Spare me the metaphors. I'm not 17 anymore. I don't buy the tortured poet routine." I shut the water off and turned to face him, crossing my arms over my chest. "You ran out on me. We were supposed to leave together. We had a plan. I waited at the Greyhound station for 6 hours. Lamar, 6 hours. And now you show up looking like a corpse, tracking mud into my life, lying to my partner. So, what is it? Drugs? Did you piss off some rich husband?" Lamar stared at me. His eyes, the pale, icy blue that used to keep me awake at night, were shimmering with unshed tears. He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between us, as if he wanted to touch my arm. Then his hand began to shake. It wasn't the subtle tremor I had noticed in the shop. It was a violent, rhythmic jerking. His fingers curled inward, locked in a spasm. Panic flared in his eyes. He tried to pull his arm back, tried to grab his wrist with his other hand to force it still. In his clumsiness, his elbow knocked against a heavy glass water pitcher sitting on the edge of the granite counter. It fell in slow motion. The crash was deafening in the quiet kitchen. Water and sharp, jagged shards of glass exploded across the tile floor, splashing against my jeans. "Shit," Lamar gasped, dropping to his knees. "Shit, I'm sorry. I'll clean it up." He reached for a piece of broken glass with his trembling hand. "Stop!" I yelled, dropping down beside him and grabbing his wrist before he could slice his palm open. His skin was freezing cold. We stayed like that on the floor, surrounded by water and ruin. I held his shaking wrist, feeling the chaotic, misfiring pulse of his muscles beneath my thumb. Deegan's footsteps pounded down the hallway. "Abbott, what happened?" He stopped at the entrance to the kitchen, taking in the scene. Me on my knees, gripping Lamar's arm. Lamar, head bowed, shoulders heaving with silent, ragged sobs, Lamar slowly lifted his head, looking past me to Deegan and then back to my face. The facade was entirely gone, stripped down to the absolute bone. "It's not drugs, Abbott," Lamar choked out, his voice cracking, entirely ignoring Deegan's presence. "My brain is dying." The silence that followed was heavier than the 15 years of absence. It pressed down on the room, suffocating and absolute. I stared at the man I used to love, feeling the solid, predictable foundation of my own life begin to crack. Deegan swept the shattered glass with agonizing precision. The rhythmic brush of stiff bristles against the kitchen tile was the only sound in the house, loud and grating as a metronome counting down the end of an era. I had guided Lamar to the guest bedroom, sitting him on the edge of the mattress like a reprimanded fragile child. The violent tremor in his hand had subsided into a dull, exhausted twitch, leaving him pale and gasping for air. "Huntington's," Lamar had whispered to the floorboards, his voice scraped hollow. "Genetics, a coin flip I lost. My mother never told me my biological father had it until I started dropping coffee cups 2 years ago." I stood in the doorway now, watching him stare at the blank wall. The anger that had sustained me for 15 years felt entirely useless, evaporating like water on a hot stove. You can't scream at a dying man. You can't demand emotional reparations from a ghost whose mind is slowly betraying him. Deegan appeared in the hallway, carrying a dustpan and a tightly coiled tension. "We need to talk," he murmured, his voice lowered so it wouldn't carry into the guest room. I followed him into our bedroom. He closed the door with a quiet, definitive click. "He needs a hospital, Abbott," Deegan said. He wasn't being cruel. Deegan dealt in risk assessment and statistics. He saw a failing, complex system and immediately sought the most logical mitigation. Or a specialized care facility. "We are not equipped for this. You are a furniture restorer. I look at actuarial tables. We do not know how to care for a man with a terminal, degenerative neurological disease." "He asked for 2 days," I said, defensively. Though I didn't know why I was defending him. Habit, maybe. A leftover reflex from when I was 17 and would defend his reckless behavior to anyone who asked. "Look at him," Deegan countered, his brow furrowing. "He doesn't have a plan for day 3. He came here because he has nowhere else to go. He is entirely bankrupt. You saw his clothes? The freelance consultant story was a desperate lie to save face." "I know. So what are we doing here, Abbott? Honestly?" "I don't know, Deegan. I don't know." The 2 days bled into a week, then 2. The woodshop remained closed. The oak credenza sat half-stripped in the dark, the harsh chemicals slowly evaporating into the damp Seattle air. Our townhouse, once a sanctuary of quiet evenings and predictable routines, morphed into a makeshift medical ward. Lamar's decline wasn't a steep, dramatic drop. It was a cruel, stuttering descent. Some days he was lucid, sharp, wearing the familiar ghost of the boy I used to know. On those days, we sat on the back patio, drinking black coffee, watching the relentless rain turn the hydrangeas into mush. He told me about New York, not the penthouse dreams, but the ugly reality, the crushing pressure, the cocaine he used to stay awake, the creeping realization that he was chasing a horizon that kept receding further away. "I was a coward, Abbott," he said one afternoon. His hands were tucked firmly under his thighs to hide the tremors. "I left because staying meant being real. It meant being with you and building something that actually mattered. I was terrified of failing at something that mattered. So I ran to a city where failure is just a tax write-off. I didn't offer absolution. You broke me, Lamar. I spent the entirety of my 20s trying to put the pieces back together. I know. He looked away, his jaw tightening, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. I didn't come back for forgiveness. I came back because before the lights go out completely, I wanted to look at the only real thing I ever had. Other days were incredibly bad. The chorea, the involuntary, erratic movements of his limbs would completely take over. He would knock over lamps, spill hot soup down his shirt, and stagger down the hallway like a man unmoored from gravity. His mind would slip, catching on jagged memories. He would call me from the guest room, panicked and sweating, asking where his mother was, or insisting he was going to be late for a high school exam. I became his caretaker. The intimacy of it was a twisted parody of the physical closeness we once shared in the dark. Helping him slowly button his shirt, guiding a glass of water to his dry lips, shaving his face when his hands were too dangerous to hold a blade. One morning, as I dragged a razor through the white lather on his jaw, he looked up at me. His icy blue eyes were startlingly clear, snapping perfectly into focus. "You have sawdust in your hair," he murmured. "I haven't been to the shop in a week," I replied, wiping the blade on a towel. "It never washes out," he said, a sad smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "I remember that. You always smelled like pine and sweat." I froze. The razor hovered inches from his throat. The memory was a physical blow to the chest. A hot summer night in his basement, the smell of damp earth, cheap beer, and my own desperate teenage longing. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat and resumed shaving. "Hold still," I commanded, my voice rough and devoid of emotion. I resented him. I resented him for returning only when his body betrayed him. I resented him for making me feel the heavy, dragging weight of grief again, long after I thought I had safely buried it beneath layers of practical indifference. Most of all, I resented the heavy toll it was taking on Deegan. The breaking point didn't come with a shout or a dramatic argument. It arrived with the quiet, devastating logic of a spreadsheet. It was a Tuesday night. Lamar had suffered a terrible evening. A severe spasm had sent a heavy ceramic plate of pasta shattering across the kitchen floor, a grim, mocking echo of his first night here. The frustration of his failing body had triggered a massive panic attack, leaving him weeping on the living room rug while I held his shoulders, whispering useless comforts until he finally exhausted himself to sleep. When I emerged from the guest room, exhausted to the marrow of my bones, the house was dark. Deegan was sitting at the dining room table, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of his laptop screen. He had a glass of scotch in his hand. The ice had completely melted. It was entirely untouched. I slumped into the heavy wooden chair across from him, rubbing my gritty eyes. My back ached. My spirit felt scraped hollow. "I found a place," Deegan said. He didn't look up from the screen. His voice was flat. "A place?" He turned the laptop toward me. The website was tasteful, decorated with muted colors and soft, comforting lighting. Oakwood Grove Assisted Living, Specialized Memory and Neurological Care. "It's in Bellevue," Deegan continued, his tone perfectly even, betraying nothing. "They have an immediate opening in their Huntington's wing. The state will cover a portion, and I've looked at our finances. we can subsidize the rest. It will mean delaying the kitchen remodel indefinitely, and you'll need to take on more commissions at the shop, but it's mathematically sound. I stared at the screen. The smiling, scrub-clad nurses in the photos felt like a personal assault. You're putting him in a home. I am securing him professional care, Deegan corrected gently. He finally looked at me. His eyes were deeply tired. He looked a decade older than his 38 years. Abbott, you are drowning. Look at your hands. I looked down. My hands, usually calloused and remarkably steady, were shaking. Not from disease, but from sheer, unadulterated exhaustion and stress. I love you, Deegan said. He reached across the table, covering my trembling hands with his warm, dry palms. I love the life we have built. I love our quiet routines, but I cannot watch you destroy yourself trying to save a man who is already gone. I didn't sign up for this. I'm sorry if that makes me the villain of this story, but I won't watch you be pulled down into the dark with him. It was an ultimatum wrapped in a lifeline. He was right. He was entirely, devastatingly right. We were two men playing make-believe in a tragedy we didn't have the tools to survive. I nodded slowly. The fight had drained right out of my blood. Okay, Deegan. The next morning, the rain finally stopped. I brought Lamar his coffee. He was sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the pale, bruised Seattle sky. He didn't seem surprised when I laid out the plan. In fact, his shoulders seemed to drop an inch, as if a great, unbearable weight had been lifted from his frame. Bellevue, he repeated softly, taking the mug with two trembling hands. Close enough for a visit. Far enough so I don't ruin your expensive carpets. Don't do that, I snapped, the sudden flare of anger surprising me. Don't act like a martyr. We can't care for you here. I am not a nurse. Deegan is losing his mind. You need doctors, Lamar. I know, Abbott. Lamar looked at me, his expression infuriatingly serene. I knew it when I came here. I already had the brochures in my bag. I blinked, processing the words. What? I needed you to be the one to do it, he confessed, looking down at his lap. I needed to know that someone gave a damn before they locked me away. I wanted someone to hold my hand while I crossed the threshold. The breath rushed out of my lungs. He hadn't come for sanctuary. He had come for a witness. He wanted me to hand him over, to finalize the transaction of his life. It was incredibly selfish. It was deeply, pathetically human. 2 days later, I packed his duffel bag. It was still entirely too light to hold 40 years of existence. The drive to Bellevue was a mirror image of the drive from the shop, only the windshield wipers were silent. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Every apology, every recrimination, every lingering question had been ground down into fine dust over the last 3 weeks. I walked him into the wide, well-lit lobby. The air smelled of vanilla air freshener and industrial cleaner. A nurse with kind eyes and sensible shoes came out from behind the desk to take his bag. Mr. Gonzalez, she asked gently, we have your room ready. Lamar nodded. He turned to me. The tremor in his arm was acting up again. He didn't try to hide it this time. He just let his arm shake against his side. He looked at me, committing my face to a memory bank that would soon start erasing its own files. Thank you, he said. His voice cracked. I didn't hug him. I couldn't. If I touched him, if I felt the fragile, bird-like bones of his shoulders, I knew I would fracture into a million irreparable pieces. Instead, I reached out and rested my heavy, calloused hand on his shoulder. "Goodbye, Lamar," I said. "Abbott," he whispered. And for a second, just a fraction of a second, the fog lifted entirely. The arrogant, beautiful golden boy from the rusted Chevrolet was looking at me, terrified and impossibly young. "I did love you. That wasn't a lie." "I know," I replied. My voice was completely steady, though my chest was tearing itself apart. But it wasn't enough. I dropped my hand. I turned and walked away before the first tear could fall. I didn't look back as the heavy automatic doors slid shut behind me, sealing him away. When I got home, the townhouse was completely quiet. The rich, familiar smell of roasting rosemary drifted from the kitchen. Deegan was at the stove, his back to me, stirring a pot. He turned, the wooden spoon in his hand, and stopped completely when he saw my face. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't offer a hollow platitude about time healing all wounds. He just set the spoon down on the granite counter, crossed the room, and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar, clean laundry, and profound stability. And finally, I wept. I wept for the boy I was, for the man Lamar could never be, and for the cruel, beautiful wreckage of it all. Tomorrow, I would go back to the shop. The oak credenza was waiting. It would take time, patience, and a steady hand to strip away the rot and reveal the strong, enduring grain beneath. I was ready to begin. If Abbott and Lamar's story struck a chord with you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder about the complexities of love and closure. We pour our hearts into these grounded emotional stories every week, and your support means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Leave a comment below. Would you have taken Lamar in? See you next time.